Pluribus episode 3 left a lot of people colder on Carol than ever. The explosion, the reckless abandon, the total disregard for anything around her, she really did lean into that most miserable person on Earth label. But in the ash of that choice, there was also a discovery, and it might be the first real leverage she's had since the world changed. With episode 4 just around the corner, I want to lay out the strongest theories and where I think this could go next. Fair warning, there will be spoilers for episode 3. The next chapter is titled Please Carol, and in this show, titles matter. We is Us, Pirate Lady, Grenade, each one was pulled right out of the text and turned into a thesis. So who's saying Please Carol and why? The cleanest read is that the Hive finally has to ask rather than appease her. Carol found a crack at the hospital when the courier admitted, "We wouldn't necessarily feel good about it." That's the first time the join expressed something like a value that could overrule their default to please. If Carol understands that, episode 4 could be her stress testing it, stacking contradictions, edge cases, and moral knots until the Hive has to draw lines. Please Carol sounds like the Hive's first attempt to persuade instead of provide. That leads into the tactic I think Carol uses next, weaponizing hospitality. She doesn't need a nuke to hurt them. She needs requests that break their programming. She can ask for mutually exclusive outcomes. Deliver the thing and don't deliver the thing. Keep me safe and let me endanger myself. Help me forget Helen and let me remember Helen. She can set up trolley problems they can't finesse, force them to decide who gets a scarce resource first, or make them choose between her satisfaction and someone else's harm. Every time they hesitate, she learns the edges of their code. Every time they refuse, she teaches them a new word, no. Please Carol is the Hive realizing she's not just a last holdout, she's a life test of their ethics. But the show isn't just puzzles, it's grief. Carol's been sprinting so fast she hasn't looked down. We've watched the aftershocks, the couch instead of the bed, the letter addressed to Helen she'll never open, the near cry that never comes. But we haven't seen the break. It's only been a few days in her timeline and she's been bounced from one impossible scene to another. At some point, the plot has to make room for the grief to land. If episode 4 does that, it could shift how we feel about her. One fully human collapse could reconnect the audience to a character many viewers find alienating. And there's a poetic way for the title to fold into that. Please Carol might be the phrase on a voicemail from Helen, a note in a drawer, a memory the Hive tries to give back to her. Carol has told him not to touch Helen's memory again, but that boundary is part of the conflict. She wants control of her grief, they want to optimize her pain. If they reach for that wound and she finally breaks, the plea could come from both directions at once. Alcohol is part of this too. The breathalyzer in the car, the instant pour when she got home, the blackout in Bilbao, swapping water for gin, the detonation that followed a drink. Alcohol keeps sitting at the hinge points of her story. At first it felt like a simple off switch in a world that wouldn't let her be herself. Now it looks more like a habit that's pulling her into worse choices. Episode 4 could force that into the open. Either she leans harder into it as a coping mechanism and the Hive tries to gently restrict access, another Please Carol moment, or she decides to cut it off for a beat, which might clear enough space for the grief to finally process and for her to think more strategically about how to slow the joining. The show keeps tying alcohol to consequences. It's time to name why. Then there's Osa. She lived, but she bled because of Carol. Emotion doesn't transmit through the Hive the way pain does, but we've seen flickers. Sadness at the idea of 11 million deaths, the courier's admission of discomfort. Sosa is the joined body closest to Carol, the face the Hive uses to talk to her, and now she's the one who got hurt. I don't think we'll see hostility. They don't kill and they don't punish. But I do think we'll see distance harden into boundaries. Sosa could be the one to say, please Carol, not as a command, but as a plea to stop using harm to force a conversation. And if Carol decides to flip the board and study the Hive from the inside, Sosa is the door. Carol might stop dodging and start asking real questions. Not, make me happy, but show me why you do what you do. If the Hive's first blush of agency is moral hesitation, Sosa is where it will show up. On top of that, I think the Hive will begin to introduce safeguards that feel like care and register as control. They won't hurt her, but they can withdraw services, throttle requests, ghost-proof her house, or ask her to agree to conditions before fulfilling certain demands. They can tilt the world so her worst impulses are harder to act on. That's likely where the plea fits. Please, Carol, let us help you without helping you harm yourself. It's the softest form of restraint, and it will infuriate her. We also can't forget the other survivors. Episode 2 made a point of showing them, and it would be odd if that thread vanished. We saw the carefree tourist energy of one, the rage of another. Carol fixated on one man across the world, but another survivor could turn their gaze toward her. Imagine someone else engineering their own version of Carol's leverage and causing fallout that lands on Carol's doorstep. She hasn't had to bear the consequences of another holdout's choices yet. If someone sparks a crisis on the other side of the planet, blowing a hole in a supply line, hijacking a distribution center, forcing triage, the Hive may need Carol's cooperation to stabilize it. That's another shape for the title. Please, Carol, we need you to do X so we can do Y. The plea isn't to stop, it's to help. There's one more angle. The Hive's absolute, we don't kill, and their new admission, we wouldn't necessarily feel good about it, combine into something that looks like embryonic conscience. Carol can exploit that by asking for things that aren't lethal but are proximate to harm. Surveillance of a private person, removal of memorials, denial of someone's harmless request in favor of hers. Every time they balk, they map their ethics. Every time they swallow their discomfort and comply, they get proof that they're still slaves to a directive. Either path teaches her how to talk to them in a way that isn't just her screaming and them smiling. So here's how I see episode 4 breaking. Carol leans into the discovery she made in the hospital and starts building dilemmas like scaffolding around the Hive's mind. Soso recovers enough to return as the Hive's voice and for the first time tries to persuade instead of placate. Carol's drinking either spikes and triggers the Hive's gentle sanctions, or she goes dry long enough to have her first full confrontation with Helen's death. Somewhere in the world, another survivor makes a mess that splashes onto Carol's life, forcing her to choose between being right and being useful. And in the middle of that, the phrase, "Please, Carol," lands, not as a command from gods, but as a human sentence, a sign that the Hive is learning to want something it can't guarantee. Carol isn't more likable after the explosion, but she is more dangerous and more interesting. If she can force the Hive to own a value, she might finally have a conversation partner instead of a mirror. And if the Hive can convince Carol to stop testing the limits by hurting people, they might learn how to truly be with someone they can't assimilate. That's the battle I expect next week. Pressure versus plea, leverage versus care, agency being born on both sides. Those are my theories for Pluribus episode 4. I'm curious where you think the title points: begging, bargaining, or a line from Helen that breaks her open. Either way, the look on Carol's face in those last seconds wasn't relief. It was recognition. She found where to press. Now we get to see what happens when the Hive says please.